Entering the year 2000, Halloween Horror Nights would be approaching its 10th anniversary at Universal Studios Florida. The event had maintained great success throughout the 1990s and established itself as the must-attend Halloween event at any theme park. With many guests eager to return, Universal had to come up with another marketing campaign that could bolster the event's popularity and drive more success. They needed something to help promote Halloween Horror Nights, or perhaps someone. This is SP History. In starting to create their marketing for the annual Halloween event, Universal would decide to create an original character to be the icon for this year. The character would be inspired by one of the greatest phobias people have, which is clowns. He would be called Jack the Clown, donning a polka-dotted suit with creepy makeup, being the ultimate nightmarish clown. Universal would test Jack out before the event by having him in the park during the day, testing his scariness and relatability. Jack would pass, and Universal knew they had a winner at hand. But Jack was not just a terrifying face to be promoted, as the minds behind Halloween Horror Nights would develop a backstory to the character, which would play into different elements of the event that year. In his backstory, in the late 1800s, Jack the Clown was born as Jack Schmidt at the Shady Brook Rest Home and Sanitarium, a location we would become familiar with in the upcoming years. In his early life, he lived in a highly abusive, poor environment, which would push him to run away and join a circus headed by Dr. Oddfellow named the Carnival of Thrills. He would serve as a clown for Oddfellow, entertaining children with pranks and pratfalls. But underneath his face paint, Schmidt was a maniacal murderer as he killed several children during his stint with Dr. Oddfellow, and soon enough during Halloween in 1920, the authorities would put the pieces together of Jack's murders, making him a wanted man. Jack would fear his arrest and make a confession to Dr. Oddfellow about his doings, begging for help to cover up the bodies of the children. With Oddfellow having his own illegal activities, the doctor would ask Jack to show him the bodies, and once he was shown, he would have Jack murdered to save himself from facing his own convictions. He would hide the body of Jack and his victims in one of the carnival's exhibits, hoping to never be found as his evil spirit was held in confinement in his own Jack-in-the-Box. Eventually, Dr. Oddfellow would sell his carnival, causing many of the exhibits to be sold off separately, still containing the spirit of Jack. 60 years later in 1980, a film crew documenting old forgotten carnivals would stumble upon Dr. Oddfellow's old exhibits and find the infamous box of the clown. Out of curiosity, this crew would attempt to open the box, turning the crank, and it would soon spin on its own. The box would soon fling open, and what came out was the decomposing body of Jack. After this discovery, the urban legend of Jack was born, and it was said that Jack was in search to extract his revenge against Dr. Oddfellow, and he would reward anyone who released him from his confinement by turning the crank. Finally, in 2000, Universal would buy some of the props from the old exhibits, one of which being the box that contained Jack, and thereafter, Universal would play on the myth of Jack, making him the main attraction of this year's event. With Jack the Clown being the icon of this year's event, the slogan would be, "Not afraid of the dark, you don't know Jack," and run for 19 nights during October like the previous year. The event would once again include a variety of haunted houses, scare zones, and other entertainment offerings to terrify and delight guests. 5 haunted houses would be featured during Halloween Horror Nights 10, replicating the same method of the previous year with different terrifying stories and characters. The first house would be located in Soundstage 22, being named Anxiety in 3D. This was the second 3D house to occur at the event, and the story was that a malfunctioning video game, created by Jack himself, played on the fears that different people had, and guests would now be trapped in it, dying to escape. It was said to include different fears like fear of spiders, rats, heights, and confined spaces. The next house would be in the same location, being called Total Chaos. The story behind the maze would be that guests entered a top-secret underground military base that had contained captured aliens, but now they have escaped, looking to feast on anyone they see. The most interesting aspect was that guests would be transported into the house by sliding down a slide into a pit of glowing balls. And while in the pit, they would be blasted with air as decapitated heads floated around them, and an alien scare actor would scare them from above and behind. The third house would play into the backstory of Jack, being named the Fear House. Located in Nazarmans, the story was that this house was built by Dr. Oddfellow himself and would be a twisted version of a funhouse. It included many evil clowns and references to Jack that would terrify the unfortunate souls that entered. The next house to be featured would be located in the Earthquake queue, as it would be an alternate take on the mazes based on classic Universal monsters, being called Universal Classic Monster Mania. The differences in this version were that the monsters would not have their traditional looks, as they would be made to look more horrifying than ever, and guests would enter the layers of these abominations. The final house to be a part of this year's event would be a unique one, as it integrated a daytime attraction into its experience, as it was called Dark Torment. Being also in the Earthquake queue, the house would have guests riding the Earthquake attraction as the beginning to the experience, but when the attraction ended, Jack would appear to the guests on the TV monitors on the subway, claiming they have died and they will now enter Hell. After so, guests would now proceed into the house, which was set in Hell itself. The facade would have guests entering a graveyard, in which they would transport them into the iron gates of Hell, where they would face numerous tortured souls and evil demons. The concept was fascinating and be one of its kind in the history of the event. And with that, these 5 houses all made their mark during the duration and provided many scares to all guests who were brave enough to journey into these realms of evil. This year would also see an increase in the amount of scare zones during the event. Each of the 4 zones would feature different kinds of goons and monsters preying on anyone who passed through. First, located in the Boneyard section, the Gauntlet would be a scare zone featuring chainsaw-wielding maniacs wearing Kiss-inspired makeup, torturing guests with their loud machines. There would be many obstacles that guests had to walk through in this zone, and Jack himself would appear here for photo ops. The next scare zone would be placed in the normal zone location in Amity Village, being named Midway of Dr. Morose. This zone was very similar to the previous zone, Midway of the Bazaar, which had been the only scare zone for many years previous, featuring many carnival freaks and clowns. Moving along, the subsequent scare zone would be named Apocalypse Island, located in Central Park, the first time this location was used for the event. Characters to reside in this part of the park were zombies, mutants, and other petrifying creatures. The last zone to be included would be called Clown Attack and be placed in the Hollywood section. The zone would feature a horde of clowns who assumed they were inspired by Jack, invading the streets of Hollywood to have their fun. Though these scare zones were not elaborate as the houses, it did establish that there would not be any safe place for guests during these nights, as the freaks and monsters owned the streets. But like mentioned, there would be different entertainment offerings during this year with 2 shows and 1 parade. The parade will once again be named the Festival of the Dead Parade, bringing back old floats and 1 new float dedicated to Jack, as the parade featured bloody playthings like demonic dolls and wooden soldiers. With the shows, one would be called Jacked Up, and would have guests peek into Jack's twisted imagination, as it featured many acrobatic acts behind edgy techno music. The other show would be the headliner, as it was the returning and acclaimed show Bill and Ted's Excellent Halloween Adventure. The show featured the Wild Stallions interacting with different pop culture characters like Charlie's Angels, Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossible, and the X-Men, as they tried to stop Mr. Burns and Mr. Smithers from The Simpsons from kidnapping all the present-day celebrities. Though featuring less shows than years previous, the shows and parade were still popular as always, bringing a great fun energy to the event. Alongside all the traditional aspects of Halloween Horror Nights, Universal would bring back a feature to the event that was used back in 1992, which was making horrifying versions of existing daytime attractions. There was only 2 attractions that would be altered, providing unique experiences to these rides. Jaws the Ride would be one of them, being temporarily named Bloody Waters, as the attraction would have the same story, but now actors would be placed throughout the ride, creating an even more creepy atmosphere as the killer shark attempts to get a bite out of you. Jack made an appearance on this version of the ride, as he would pop out behind barrels scaring guests, but he would be removed due to an incident where the actor playing Jack fell into the water. The actor was not seriously injured. The other attraction to be altered would be Confrontation, as it was renamed Nightmare Creatures 2, which instead of taking guests on the normal ride experience, they would now be taken to the streets below the ride vehicles, where scare actors would be lurking around every corner looking to cause mayhem. It could be said it was more like an indoor scare zone rather than an actual attraction. Though being a unique experience, this would be the final time that daytime attractions would be altered for Halloween Horror Nights. Halloween Horror Nights 10 would be a massive success at the end of its duration, with not only including more new haunted houses and scare zones, but now had shown how they can use storytelling within the event. Jack the Clown's appearance solidified him as the new face of horror for Universal, but Jack would not be alone, as he would pave the way for many other horrifying figures to make their way towards the prestigious Halloween events.